My husband looked straight through me that night. "Evelyn, you'll sit over there," Richard said, barely lowering his voice, as if I were a staff member, not his wife of 30 years. Then he placed his hand on Lila Carter's back, young, polished, glowing, and led her toward the main table, our table. I sat alone under a dim chandelier, surrounded by strangers while whispers circled like smoke. But what Richard didn't know was this. The biggest donation announced that night wouldn't carry his name. It would carry mine. And before the night was over, every single person in that room would know exactly who I was. If you've ever been underestimated or quietly pushed aside, I'd love to hear your story. Like this video, subscribe if you believe in second chances, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I used to believe my life was something people quietly envied. 32 years of marriage, a beautiful home in Westchester, charity luncheons, holiday dinners, grandchildren who visited just enough to keep the house feeling alive. And Richard Howard. My husband was the kind of man people stood up for when he entered a room. Successful, respected, untouchable. And for most of my life, I stood just a step behind him. Not because I had to, because I chose to. I couldn't have done any of this without Evelyn. Richard used to say, his hand gently resting on my back during company events. Back then, it felt sincere. Now, when I replay those moments in my mind, I hear something else. Performance. I met Richard when I was 28. He had ambition, but no real stability. I had a modest inheritance from my parents and a steady job in nonprofit administration. We built everything together, at least that's what I believed. I handled the early finances. I introduced him to people who trusted me. I hosted dinners that helped him land his first real investors. I knew when to speak and when to stay quiet, and slowly his world grew. Bigger offices, bigger deals, bigger ego. But I never complained. "Evelyn, you're the reason I can do what I do," he would whisper sometimes late at night when the world had quieted and he was just a man again. I held on to those moments. They were enough. Or at least I convinced myself they were. Things didn't change overnight. That's the part people misunderstand. A marriage doesn't crack like glass, it fades like a photograph. At first, it was small. Richard started taking more business trips. Chicago this week. Maybe San Francisco next, he'd say casually, barely looking up from his phone. I didn't question it. His company was expanding. It made sense. Then came the late nights. "I'll eat out. Don't wait up." The first time he said it, I still set the table. Habit, I guess. I sat there for almost an hour before I finally cleared his plate. After that, I stopped. Then came the silence. Not the comfortable kind we used to share while reading in the same room. This was different, heavy. Like something unsaid was sitting between us. I started noticing the way he held his phone, always angled away from me, always face down when he left the room. And one night, I saw it. A message lit up his screen while he was in the shower. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Elle." Just one line. But it felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that screen like it might explain itself. It didn't. When he came out, towel around his shoulders, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed. "Who's Elle?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He didn't even hesitate. "Laura, from the Chicago firm. We're closing a deal." He said it so easily, too easily. I nodded like it made perfect sense, and in that moment, I made a choice. I chose not to push. Not yet. Because after 30 years, you don't destroy something over one message. You wait, you watch. You gather the truth slowly. But the truth has a way of showing up whether you're ready or not. A week later, I was organizing laundry when I found it, a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. Not Chicago. New York. 2 nights. 2 guests. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed again, the same spot as before, holding that piece of paper like it might burn me. 2 guests. There was no explanation for that. Not one I could believe. That night, I almost confronted him again. Almost. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not denial. Something quieter. Instinct. I needed to understand the full picture. Because if I was right, if everything I was starting to suspect was true, then one conversation wouldn't fix it, and I wasn't going to walk into a storm unprepared. So I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The way he smiled at his phone. The way he dressed more carefully before certain meetings. The faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. I stopped asking questions, and that seemed to make him more comfortable, more careless. Sometimes I would sit across from him at dinner on the rare nights he was home and study his face, trying to find the man I married, trying to see if he was still there. But what I saw instead was distance. And something else. Calculation. As if he had already moved on in ways I hadn't caught up to yet. "Everything okay?" he asked, once noticing me watching him. "Of course," I said softly. "Just tired." He nodded, relieved. Relieved. That was when something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. Because in that moment, I realized something I had been avoiding. Richard wasn't confused. He wasn't going through a phase. He knew exactly what he was doing. And worse, he thought I didn't. A few days later, he mentioned the gala. "Big charity event next week," he said, scrolling through emails. "You should come." Should. Not I want you there. Not we'll go together. Just should. "I'd like that," I replied. And I meant it, because something in me had already decided I wasn't going to keep guessing. I wasn't going to keep pretending. Whatever was happening, I was going to see it for myself, up close, in the same room, under the same lights. And if Richard Howard thought I would sit quietly while my life was rewritten without me, then he had forgotten exactly who I was. Once you start noticing something, you can't stop. That's the truth no one prepares you for. After that message, the one signed with a simple L, my world didn't shatter. It sharpened. Every detail became louder. Every silence meant something, and every lie felt almost predictable. A few days after finding the hotel receipt, I stopped being a wife. I became an observer, quiet, careful, patient. I watched Richard the way you watch someone you no longer trust, but haven't yet exposed. One morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when his phone buzzed again on the counter. He had stepped outside to take a call. I didn't touch it. Not at first. I just stood there, staring at the screen as it lit up. Dinner tonight still on, L short. Casual. Familiar. Not business. Not professional. Personal. Intimate. I picked up the phone slowly like it might explode in my hands. There were no passwords. There never had been. That used to feel like trust. Now it felt like arrogance. He thought I wouldn't look. He thought I wouldn't dare. I opened the message thread. And there it was. Weeks of conversations. Months, maybe. Plans. Jokes. Private moments. Things he hadn't shared with me in years. "I miss you. Last night was perfect. She doesn't suspect anything. I stopped breathing for a second when I read that last line. She. Not my name, just she. Like I was a shadow in my own marriage. Like I didn't matter enough to be named. My hands started to shake, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I kept scrolling. Photos. Her. Lila. Younger. Confident. Always smiling. She wore the kind of clothes I used to wear when Richard still noticed me. There were pictures of dinners, hotel rooms, a beach I didn't recognize, a life, a separate life. And the worst part, Richard looked happy, not guilty, not conflicted, happy. I put the phone down exactly where I found it. By the time he walked back into the kitchen, I was pouring coffee into 2 cups like nothing had changed. Who is that? I asked casually. Just work, he said, grabbing his mug. Of course, always work. I smiled. Busy week. You have no idea. Oh, I think I do, I thought. But I didn't say it. Not yet. Because now I knew something important. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't temporary. It was a full betrayal. And more than that, he had already rewritten our story in his mind. I spent the rest of that day moving through the house like a ghost, touching things that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The photographs on the wall, our wedding picture, family vacations, all those moments that had once felt solid. Now they felt touching things that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The photographs on the wall, our wedding picture, family vacations, all those moments that had once felt solid. Now they felt staged, like I had been living inside a version of reality that only I believed in. That evening, Richard came home later than usual. Again. I ate already, he said, loosening his tie. Of course you did, I replied softly. He didn't notice the tone, or maybe he chose not to. We sat in the living room for a while, the television on, but neither of us watching. Then he glanced at his phone again, smiled, just for a second. But I saw it, and something inside me went cold. Good news, I asked. Yeah, he said, something like that. I nodded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his phone across the room. I wanted to demand answers, to force him to look me in the eyes and admit what he had done. But I didn't, because anger is loud, and loud people make mistakes. I needed to be precise. A few nights later, I found another clue. This time, it wasn't hidden. It was careless. Richard had left his briefcase open on the dining table. Inside was a folder I didn't recognize. I shouldn't have looked, but I did, and that's when things shifted from painful to dangerous. It wasn't just personal. It was financial. Documents, contracts, a new company name I had never seen before. Carter and Vale Consulting. Carter. My chest tightened. I flipped through the pages. Partnership agreements, investment transfers, large sums of money being moved. Quietly, strategically. And then I saw Richard's signature, next to hers. Lila Carter. Not just an affair, a partnership, a plan. I sat down slowly, the folder still open in my hands. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about midlife crisis or loneliness. This was calculated. He wasn't just replacing me emotionally. He was positioning himself to replace me entirely. Financially, legally. My mind started connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there. The distance, the secrecy, the sudden interest in restructuring assets. It all made sense now. He was preparing. For what? Divorce. A clean exit. A life where I would be, what, an afterthought. A settlement. I closed the folder carefully and placed it exactly where I found it. When Richard came home that night, I greeted him the same way I always had. "Long day," I asked. "You could say that." He kissed my cheek lightly, a gesture so automatic it almost felt insulting. And in that moment, I understood something with complete clarity. The man standing in front of me wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He wasn't even hiding very well. He simply believed he was untouchable, that I would never see the full picture, that I would never act, that I would stay exactly where he had placed me, quiet, supportive, invisible. I smiled at him, and for the first time in years, it wasn't out of love. It was strategy, because now I wasn't just watching anymore. I was preparing. And whatever Richard Howard thought he was building behind my back, he had no idea I was already steps ahead. Preparation changes you. It strips away hesitation. It replaces emotion with focus. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking like a wife. I was thinking like a woman who had everything to lose and nothing left to protect. The morning after I found the documents, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Margaret," I said when she picked up. A pause, then a warm, familiar voice. "Evelyn Howard." "Well, this is unexpected." Margaret Klein had been my attorney once, back when Richard and I were just starting out, when every decision mattered and every signature carried weight. More importantly, she had always been my attorney, not his. "I need to see you," I said quietly. Something in my tone must have reached her. When she asked, "Today?" By noon, I was sitting across from her in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Manhattan. She studied me for a moment before speaking. "You look composed," she said carefully. "That usually means something serious." I gave a small smile. "It is." I didn't ease into it. I told her everything, the messages, the hotel receipt, the partnership documents, Lila Carter, every detail I had gathered. Margaret didn't interrupt. She just listened, her expression growing sharper with every word. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said slowly, "that's not just an affair." "I know. That's strategic asset movement. I know. And if those documents are accurate," she paused, tapping her pen lightly. "He's preparing for separation." Quietly. I nodded. "He thinks I won't notice." Margaret gave a dry laugh. "He's counting on it." Silence settled between us for a moment. Then she leaned forward. "Tell me something honestly, Evelyn. What do you want?" It was such a simple question, but it hit me harder than anything else, because for years I hadn't asked myself that. What did I want? Not what I was willing to tolerate. Not what I could survive. What I wanted. "I want control," I said finally. My voice was calm, certain. "I want to understand exactly what he's doing." I hadn't asked myself that. What did I want? Not what I was willing to tolerate. Not what I could survive. What I wanted. "I want control," I said finally. My voice was calm, certain. "I want to understand exactly what he's doing before he finishes doing it." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then you'll need more than suspicion. I have copies," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You came prepared." "I've learned from the best." She opened the folder and began reviewing the documents. Her expression shifted quickly from curiosity to concern. "Evelyn, these transfers are significant," she said. He's moving money into joint ventures under her company's name. That's not just risky, it's deliberate. Can he hide assets this way? Not legally, but if no one challenges it. She shrugged slightly. It becomes reality. I let that sink in. That was exactly what Richard was counting on. Silence, compliance, time. So what do we do? I asked. Margaret closed the folder carefully. We slow him down, she said. How? By knowing more than he thinks we know. I leaned forward slightly. I'm listening. She outlined it step by step. Financial tracing, quiet audits, monitoring account activity, everything legal, everything precise. No confrontation. Not yet. Because once he realized I knew, he would move faster. And that was the one thing we couldn't allow. You need to keep acting exactly the same, Margaret said. Like nothing has changed. I smiled faintly. I've been doing that for months. Good, she replied. Then keep doing it. As I left her office that afternoon, something inside me felt steady. Not broken, not lost. Steady. For the first time since everything began unraveling, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving. That evening, Richard called. I might be late, he said. Dinner meeting. With who? I asked casually. A client. Of course. All right, I said. I won't wait up. There was a pause. Then he said, You've been very understanding lately. I almost laughed. Have I? Yeah, he said. It helps. Helps. That word stayed with me long after the call ended. It helps him. It helps him lie. It helps him move money. It helps him build a life without me. I set my phone down and looked around the house. Our house, or what used to feel like ours. Now it felt like a stage, and I was finally aware of the script. A few days passed. Quietly. Carefully. Margaret's team began digging, and I continued watching. One night, I continued watching. One night, Richard came home earlier than usual. Surprisingly early. He seemed energized. Big news, he said, pouring himself a drink. Oh, I replied. The gala next week, he continued. It's going to be bigger than expected. Came home earlier than usual. Surprisingly early. He seemed energized. Big news, he said, pouring himself a drink. Oh, I replied. The gala next week, he continued. It's going to be bigger than expected. I nodded. I'm looking forward to it. He glanced at me, almost assessing. Good. There was something in his tone, something rehearsed. What kind of news? I asked. He hesitated, then smiled. You'll see. That smile again. Controlled, calculated. And in that moment, I knew. The gala wasn't just a charity event. It was part of his plan. Something was going to happen there. Something public. Something symbolic. And suddenly, the memory of Lila's name on those documents clicked into place. Carter and Vale. Carter. She wouldn't stay hidden forever. Not in his world. Not at an event like that. She'll be there, won't she? I asked softly. Richard froze. Just for a second. Then he recovered. Who? I held his gaze. Lila. Silence. Thick. Heavy. And then... He smiled, but this time there was no warmth in it. Evelyn, he said slowly, you're imagining things. I tilted my head slightly. Am I? Yes, he replied firmly. You've always had a tendency to overthink. Overthink. That word again. Dismissive. Carefully chosen. I nodded. Of course, I said. gently. My mistake. He relaxed instantly. Conversation over. Control restored. At least that's what he believed. But as I watched him walk away, something inside me settled into place. Because now I knew two things for certain. He was bringing her into the open, and he still believed I would stay exactly where he had placed me. Quiet, oblivious, harmless. I smiled to myself. Because he had no idea the gala wasn't going to be his moment. It was going to be mine. Once you see the pattern, you start predicting the moves. And Richard had become predictable. Not because he was careless, but because he believed he was in control. That's the most dangerous kind of confidence. The days leading up to the gala felt strangely calm. Too calm. Like the quiet before something breaks. Richard was different. More attentive, but not to me. To appearances. He adjusted his schedule. Canceled a few dinners. Spent more time at home, but always on his phone, always slightly distracted. Preparing. That's what he was doing. And I knew it. One evening, I was in the bedroom when he walked in holding his phone like it carried something important. "Evelyn?" he said. I turned to face him. "Yes, for the gala, I think it might be better if we arrive separately." There it was. Not even a question. A decision. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Separately?" "Yeah," he said quickly. "It's just logistics. I'll already be there early. Hosting responsibilities, sponsors, press. It's complicated." Complicated. Everything with him was always complicated when it came to me. "I see," I said calmly. "It'll be easier this way," he added. "For him, always for him." "And where would I sit?" I asked. He hesitated. "Just a fraction," but I caught it. "There will be seating arrangements," he said. "I'm sure they'll take care of you. Take care of me." Like I was a guest. Not his wife. Not the woman who had helped build the reputation he was now standing on. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. I wouldn't want to complicate things. Relief washed over his face. Instant. Visible. "Thank you," he said. That word again. Thank you for being quiet. Thank you for not asking questions. Thank you for making this easy. He leaned in and kissed my cheek before leaving the room. And I stood there, completely still. Because in that moment, everything became undeniable. He wasn't just distancing me. He was replacing me, publicly, at that gala. And suddenly the pieces fit together perfectly. He arrives early. She's already there. They appear together. Natural, effortless, as if it had always been that way. And me, I walk in alone. Sit somewhere in the background. Fade quietly into irrelevance. A transition. That's what he was planning. Not a confrontation. Not a scandal. A smooth transition from one life to another. Without disruption. Without noise. Without me. I let out a slow breath. Then I smiled. Because he had made one critical mistake. He told me. Not directly, but enough. Enough for me to see the entire picture. That night, I called Margaret again. "He wants me to arrive alone," I said. She didn't sound surprised. "That confirms it," she replied. "He's going to present her." "Yes." Silence. Then she added, "Are you ready?" I looked at my reflection in the mirror. For years, I had seen a woman who stood beside someone else. Supportive, graceful, invisible. Now I saw something different. "I am," I said. The next few days moved quickly. Quietly, deliberately. Margaret's team uncovered more. Hidden transfers, shell accounts, structured investments under Lila's company. Everything carefully arranged. Everything designed to look legitimate, but it wasn't clean. There were cracks, enough to expose everything at the right moment. And that's when Margaret said something that changed everything. "You don't have to wait for him to make his move," she told me. "I know. You can take control of the narrative." I paused. "How?" She smiled slightly. "Publicly." The word lingered. Publicly. The gala. Of course. The perfect stage. The perfect audience. The perfect moment. What if Margaret continued, "You didn't just show up"? I tilted my head. What if you made an impact? I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger, not revenge, something sharper. Purpose. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I'm suggesting," she said calmly, "that you remind everyone exactly who Evelyn Howard is." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind was working, planning, rewriting the ending he thought he had already secured. The next morning, I made a call. "Good morning," a cheerful voice answered. "This is Evelyn Howard," I said. A brief pause, then immediate recognition. "Mrs. Howard, how can we assist you?" "I'd like to make a donation," I said. "Of course," the E-woman replied. "In your husband's name?" "This is Evelyn Howard," I said. A brief pause, then immediate recognition. "Mrs. Howard, how can we assist you?" "I'd like to make a donation," I said. "Of course," the woman replied. "In your husband's name?" I smiled. "No," I said clearly. "In mine." Silence. "Then I'm sorry, just to confirm." "In my name." I repeated. There was a shift in her tone. Professional. Alert. "Absolutely. What amount would you like to pledge?" I looked out the window, watching the quiet street below. For years, I had supported causes quietly. Through Richard, through joint donations, through his name. Not this time. $5 million, I said. The silence on the other end was profound. "Mrs. Howard, did you say?" "Yes," I said calmly. $5 million. Under your name. Yes. A breath. "Then we will prepare everything immediately." "Good," I replied. "And one more thing." "Yes, I'd like the announcement to be made during the main program." Another pause. "That can certainly be arranged." I smiled softly. "Perfect." When I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, letting it settle. This wasn't about money. It was about presence, visibility, control. Richard had planned a moment, a carefully orchestrated introduction, a quiet replacement. But he had underestimated something. Me. That evening he came home looking relaxed, confident. "How's everything?" he asked. "Wonderful," I said. "Ready for the gala?" I met his eyes. "More than ever." He smiled, and for the first time I smiled back. Not as his wife, not as the woman he thought he could sideline, but as someone who was about to change everything. Because the night of that gala, I wasn't going to sit alone. I was going to take the spotlight, and Richard Howard was about to realize he had built his entire plan on the wrong woman. The day of the gala arrived with a strange kind of stillness. Not peace, not nerves, something sharper. Clarity. I woke up earlier than usual, the soft morning light spilling across the bedroom floor. For a moment, I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the house. Years ago, this house felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt like a place I was preparing to leave even before I physically did. Richard was already gone. Of course he was. He had told me he needed to be there early, hosting responsibilities, important people, important moments. I sat up slowly, letting the weight of the day settle into my chest. Tonight, everything would change. Not because of him, because of me. I walked into my closet and stood there for a long moment. Rows of dresses, years of events. Every outfit carefully chosen to match his world, his expectations, his image. Not today. My hand moved past the familiar pieces until it stopped. At the back, a dress I hadn't worn in years. Deep emerald, elegant, strong. It wasn't the kind of dress that blended in. It was the kind that made people look twice. I pulled it out slowly. Yes, I whispered to myself. This one. As I got ready, I didn't rush. Every detail mattered. Hair, makeup, jewelry. Not excessive, not loud, but intentional, controlled. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman Richard had slowly pushed aside. I saw Evelyn Howard, and for the first time in a long time, that name meant something again. By the time I left the house, the sun had already started to set. The city was glowing, alive. Unaware of the quiet war that was about to unfold inside one of its grandest ballrooms. The gala was held at the Grand Regency Hotel, a place I had been to many times before, but tonight felt different. As the car pulled up to the entrance, cameras flashed. Photographers lined the sidewalk. Guests arrived in waves, politicians, executives, socialites, all dressed in polished perfection, all playing their roles. I stepped out of the car alone, and for a brief second I felt it. The shift, eyes turning. Not out of recognition, but curiosity, because I wasn't arriving the way I used to. Not beside Richard, but on my own. I straightened my shoulders and walked forward, each step steady, each breath controlled. Inside the ballroom was already buzzing. Soft music, crystal chandeliers, conversations layered over laughter and clinking glasses. I scanned the room, and then I saw him. Richard, across the room, perfectly positioned, surrounded by people, confident, commanding, exactly as he had planned. And beside him, her, Lila Carter. You don't forget the face of the woman your husband is building a new life with. She was younger, polished, effortlessly elegant, wearing a silver dress that caught the light with every movement. She stood close to him, too close, as if she belonged there, as if she had already taken my place. And the worst part? No one looked surprised. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't new to them. This had already been introduced, just not to me. I felt the sting rise in my chest, sharp, hot, but I didn't let it show. Not tonight. Instead, I smiled and walked deeper into the room. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. Why would they? I had always been invisible here. That's what made this so easy. I found my assigned table, near the back. Of course, far from the stage, far from Richard, far from everything that mattered. I sat down slowly, placing my clutch on the table. A few polite nods from strangers, small talk, empty conversations. All of it background noise, because my focus was elsewhere, on the stage, on the timing, on the moment that was coming. As the evening progressed, I watched. Richard moving from group to group, Lila always within reach. sometimes a step behind, sometimes right beside him. Their rhythm was seamless, practiced, rehearsed. And then it happened. The host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the room. The lights dimmed slightly. Conversation softened. "Thank you all for joining us tonight for such an important cause." I sat up straighter. This was it. The program moved forward. Speeches, acknowledgments, recognitions, everything building toward the main moment. And then the host smiled. "We would like to take a moment to recognize one of our key partners this year." My heart slowed, not raced. Slowed, because I already knew. Mr. Richard Howard. Applause filled the room. Richard stepped forward, confident, controlled, exactly as expected. And the host continued, his colleague, Ms. Lila Carter. More applause, louder this time, because this was new. Lila stepped forward, joining him on stage. The lights caught them perfectly. A picture, a story, a message. I watched as they stood there together, side by side, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel it, the betrayal, the humiliation, the anger, all of it, because I needed it, just enough to remind me why I was here. Then I let it go, because this wasn't their moment. Not anymore. The host continued speaking, praising their contributions, their partnership, their impact. Every word carefully chosen, every sentence reinforcing the image they wanted to present. A new duo, a new future. And now the host said we would like to open the floor for our major donors. There it was, the turning point. I exhaled slowly and stood up. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? I was just a woman in the back of the room, walking forward, alone. But then, the coordinator saw me. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She nodded, and within seconds, everything shifted. Because the next name the host read changed the entire room. Mrs. Evelyn Howard. The name echoed through the ballroom, clear, sharp, unmistakable. For a second, no one reacted, because they weren't expecting it. Not here. Not like this. And then, whispers. Heads turning. The room shifted. I kept walking, step by step, measured, calm, controlled. I could feel it now. Every eye in the room moving toward me, trying to place me, recognize me, understand why my name had just been called. On that stage, at that moment. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I simply walked forward like I belonged there. Because I did. By the time I reached the front, the coordinator was already waiting. Her expression was careful, but her eyes said everything. She handed me the microphone, softly, respectfully. "Mrs. Howard," she whispered. I gave her a small nod. Then I turned and faced the room. The lights were brighter up here, warmer, but they didn't intimidate me, not anymore. I glanced to my right, and there he was, Richard, standing frozen for the first time in years. He didn't look in control. He looked confused, and beside him, Lila. Her smile had disappeared, replaced by something else. Uncertainty. Good. Let them feel it. Just a little. I turned back to the audience, took a breath, and spoke. "Good evening," I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't falter. It carried. Strong. Clear. Confident. My name is Evelyn Howard. A pause. Let it settle, because names matter, especially when people think they already know the story. I've attended this gala for many years. I continued, usually quietly. A few polite smiles, nods, recognition starting to flicker. But tonight, I said I decided to do something differently. Silence. The kind that listens. I made a donation. Another pause. The host stepped slightly closer, sensing the moment, and I wanted to make sure it was acknowledged properly. I looked directly into the crowd. Not at Richard, not at Lila, at the people who mattered. The donation is $5 million. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, shock rippling through the room. 5 million wasn't just generous, it was statement level. And I let them feel it, let them process it, let them wonder. Then I added the part that mattered most. It is made under my name. Silence. Then louder whispers, confusion, interest, a shift in perception. Because now they were asking the question, who is she? Not Richard's wife, not someone in the background, but me, Evelyn Howard. I saw it in their faces. The recalculation, the curiosity, the sudden awareness that they had missed something. And that was exactly what I wanted. I turned slightly toward the host. He was smiling now, genuinely. Mrs. Howard, he said into his microphone, this is an extraordinary contribution. I nodded. Thank you. He hesitated for a moment, then added, would you like to say a few more words? I could feel Richard's eyes on me now. Sharp, intense, warning, as if he could still control this, even from a distance. I ignored him, completely. Yes, I said, I would. I stepped forward just a fraction, closer to the center of the stage, and then I spoke again. For many years, I said I believed that supporting something meant standing quietly behind it. I paused. Let the weight of that settle. I believed that being part of something important meant not needing recognition. A few people nodded, because they understood that, especially the women in the room. I was wrong. The word cut through the air. Clean. Final. I've come to realize that sometimes being silent doesn't make you strong. Another pause. It makes you invisible. Now the room was completely still. No movement, no distraction, just listening. And tonight, I continued. I chose not to be invisible. I let that land. Then I smiled, softly. Not bitter, not angry, just certain. Because impact deserves a voice. Applause. At first scattered, then building, stronger, warmer, real. I stepped back slightly, giving the moment space, letting it grow. Because this wasn't just about the money. It was about presence. And they felt it. The host stepped forward again, clearly impressed. Mrs. Howard, he said, on behalf of everyone here, thank you. I nodded. And then just for a moment, I turned my head toward Richard. Our eyes met. And in that second, everything shifted. He understood. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that the narrative had changed. Enough to know that he was no longer in control of how this night would be remembered. And that was only the beginning. I handed the microphone back to the host, then stepped off the stage. The applause still following me, but something else followed too. Attention. People moved, subtly at first, then more openly. turning toward me, watching me, some even stepping closer. Because now I wasn't invisible anymore. I walked back into the room, but not to the back table. Not this time. A woman approached me first. Elegant, confident. I had no idea, she said softly. That was remarkable. Thank you, I replied. Another joined her, then another. Questions, compliments, interest, all directed at me. And across the room, I saw it. Richard trying to recover, trying to reassemble control. But the attention had shifted, and he couldn't pull it back. Not now, not tonight. Because for the first time, I had stepped into the light. And I wasn't stepping out again. I barely made it 3 steps before someone stopped me. Mrs. Howard Evelyn, right? I turned. A man in his 60s, tailored tuxedo, confident smile. I recognized him vaguely, one of the board members. Yes, I said calmly. That was extraordinary, he continued. 5 million, and we've never even had a proper conversation. I smiled slightly. That's kind of the point, I replied. He blinked, then laughed, half amused, half intrigued. Well, I think that's about to change. Of course it was. Because now they were all looking, and for once, I wasn't hiding. More people approached. A woman with silver hair touched my arm gently. I've been coming to this gala for 20 years, she said. I don't think I've ever seen a moment like that. I haven't either, I answered honestly. Not like this. Not from this side. Another voice joined in. Are you involved with the foundation directly? I am now, I said. That answer lingered. Because it wasn't just polite conversation. It was a declaration. I could feel it building, the shift in how they saw me. Not as an extension of Richard, but as an independent force. And across the room, Richard saw it too. He was moving toward me now. Slowly, carefully, like a man trying to walk into a situation he no longer understood. Lila followed half a step behind. Of course she did. Always close, always positioned. But this time, they weren't the center. I was. The crowd parted slightly as Richard approached, people stepping back, but not out of respect, out of curiosity. They wanted to see what would happen. So did I. Evelyn. His voice was controlled, too controlled, which meant he was rattled. I turned to face him. Yes, Richard. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. I simply stood there, present, equal. That alone seemed to throw him off. That was quite a surprise, he said. I imagine it was, I replied. A brief silence, tight, measured. He glanced around, aware of the eyes on us, then leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. You could have told me, he said. There it was. Not concern, not admiration, control, expectation. The belief that I still needed his permission. I held his gaze. I didn't need to, I said quietly. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw something crack. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Uncertainty. $5 million isn't something you just decide overnight. He continued, still trying to sound composed. No, I said, it isn't. Another pause. Then I added, just enough for him to hear. And yet, I did. That landed hard. Because now he was doing the math. Trying to understand where it came from. How I had access. How much I knew. And more importantly, how much I had taken back. Lila stepped forward, then her voice light, careful. That was very generous, Evelyn, she said. I turned to her, really looked at her, up close. She was beautiful, poised, young enough to still believe she understood the game, but not experienced enough to realize when the rules had changed. "Thank you, Lila," I said. I used her name deliberately, watched the flicker in her eyes, because now she knew I knew everything, and she knew I wasn't pretending anymore. "I didn't realize you were so involved," she added. There was a question hidden in that sentence. A test. I answered it simply. "I've always been involved," I said. "I was just never visible." Silence. The kind that shifts power. Richard cleared his throat slightly, trying to regain footing. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "this certainly adds to the evening." I tilted my head just a fraction. "Yes," I said, "it does." Another pause. Then someone behind me spoke up. "Richard, you never mentioned your wife was one of the major donors." The tone wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't neutral either. It was curious, sharp, observing. Richard turned, slightly adjusting his posture. "We've always preferred to keep things understated," he said. I almost smiled. Almost. Because that wasn't true. Not really. He had never been understated. Only me. And that distinction mattered. Another voice joined. "Well, understated or not," a woman said. That was the most impactful moment of the night. More agreement. More attention. And I could feel it again. The shift. Subtle, but undeniable. People weren't looking at Richard anymore. They were looking at me. Me. Evelyn Howard. Not his wife. Not his shadow. Just me. Richard noticed it too. Of course he did. His eyes moved across the group, calculating, repositioning, trying to pull the focus back. But it wasn't working, because the story had already changed. And stories, once they shift, they don't go back. "I think we should discuss this later," he said quietly, turning back to me. There it was, the private conversation, the attempt to contain this, control it behind closed doors, like everything else. I met his gaze. Calm, steady. "No," I said. Just one word, but it carried weight. He blinked. "Not expecting that. Not tonight," I added. The message was clear. This moment wasn't his to manage. It was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. Before he could respond, someone else stepped in. "Evelyn, would you join us at the front table?" the board member asked. "We'd be honored." This moment wasn't his to manage. It was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. Before he could respond, someone else stepped in. "Evelyn, would you join us at the front table?" the board member asked. "We'd be honored." Front table, not the back, not hidden, visible, recognized. I looked at him, then at Richard, then back at the man. "Yes," I said. And just like that, I moved forward, past Richard, past Lila, without hesitation, without apology. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because I already knew what I would see. A man realizing he had underestimated the woman standing beside him for years. And a woman beside him realizing she had stepped into something far more complicated than she expected. I took my seat at the front table. The conversations resumed, but they weren't the same. Now they included me, centered around me, questions about my vision, my intentions, my future involvement, real conversations, not polite background noise. And as I sat there, listening, responding, owning the space I had stepped into, one thought settled quietly in my mind. This wasn't just about tonight. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to Richard's life. I was building my own. And he had no idea how much more was coming. The front table felt different, not just because of where it was, but because of what it meant. For years, I had sat at the edges of rooms like this, close enough to be seen, but never close enough to matter. Tonight, that changed. Evelyn, the board chairman, said, leaning toward me, "We would love to discuss your vision for the foundation." Vision. That word lingered, because for most of my life, no one had asked me that. Not really. I folded my hands calmly on the table. "I think the foundation has done incredible work," I said, "but I also think there are voices missing from the conversation." He nodded slowly. "Go on." "I've spent years supporting causes quietly," I continued, "and I've seen firsthand how often the people closest to the problems are the least heard." A woman across from me leaned in. "That's very true." So I said, "If I'm going to be involved, I want to make sure we're not just funding solutions. I want to make sure we're listening to you, the people who actually need them." So I said, "If I'm going to be involved, I want to make sure we're not just funding solutions. I want to make sure we're listening to the people who actually need them." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, thoughtful, respectful. And then, "That's exactly the kind of perspective we need," the chairman said. Of course it was. Because it was real, not rehearsed, not curated, earned. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. Richard, still watching, still calculating, still trying to understand how this conversation was happening without him at the center. I turned my attention back to the table, because this moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about me stepping fully into something I had been denied for years. "So tell me," another board member said, "how long have you been involved in philanthropy?" I almost laughed, but I didn't. "I've been involved my entire marriage," I said, which was true, just not publicly. And yet the man said, "We're only hearing about you now." I met his eyes. "Yes," I said simply. No apology, no explanation. Because the truth was complicated, and I wasn't ready to give all of it. Not yet. The conversation shifted again. More questions, more interest, more respect. It was subtle but powerful. Because respect, when it's real, feels different. And I could feel it now, settling around me, building, strengthening. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I was being seen. "Excuse me," a familiar voice interrupted. "Richard, of course." He stepped closer to the table, forcing a polite smile. "May I borrow my wife for a moment?" There it was again. My wife. The possession, the label, the reminder of where he thought I belonged. The chairman hesitated, then looked at me. Not at Richard. At me. "Of course," he said. "If you'd like." Choice. He gave me a choice. That alone said everything. I stood slowly, gracefully. "I'll be right back," I said. But even as I said it, I knew something. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Richard led me a few steps away, far enough to be private, but not so far that we weren't still visible. Always aware of appearances, always careful. Once we were alone, his expression changed. The smile dropped. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "Straight to it. No pretense." "I'm sitting at a table," I replied. "You know that's not what I mean." I held his gaze. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. A beat, tension tightening. "You blindsided me tonight," he said. "Did I asked calmly. "Yes." He snapped, then lowered his voice again. $5 million, Evelyn, on your own. Without even mentioning it. I tilted my head slightly. Why would I need to mention it? His eyes flashed. Because we're married. There it was. The core of it. Control disguised as partnership. I took a slow breath. We are married, I said, but that doesn't mean I need permission to make decisions about my own money. That hit him harder than I expected. His expression shifted. Sharp. Suspicious. Your own money, he repeated. Yes. Silence, thick, heavy. Because now, he was starting to understand something deeper, something he hadn't considered before. Where did that money come from? He asked. There it was, the question he was afraid to ask. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I had spent decades with. This man who thought he knew everything about me. And I realized something. He didn't know me at all. It came from me, I said. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. His jaw tightened. You're being evasive. No, I said quietly. I'm being private. Another pause, then I added, the same way you've been, for years. That landed, because he knew what I meant, even if he didn't want to admit it. His eyes flickered for just a second, toward the room, toward Lila, then back to me. And in that moment, everything became clearer. You think I don't know? I said, softly. His body went still, dangerously still. Know what he asked, but the question lacked conviction, because he already knew. I stepped a little closer, not aggressively, just enough. I know about Lila, I said. There it was, out in the open. No more pretending, no more silence. For a moment, he didn't react. Then, that's not what you think, he said quickly. Of course it wasn't. It never is. I almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. It doesn't matter what I think, I said. It matters what you did. Another pause. Longer this time. He exhaled slowly, trying to regain control, trying to reshape the narrative. This isn't the place to have this conversation, he said. He was right, but not in the way he meant. No, I said, it's not. And then I stepped back, creating space. Physical, emotional, final. But this is the place where everything changes. He stared at me, confused, unsettled, because for the first time, he couldn't predict me. He couldn't control me. He couldn't even fully understand me. And that terrified him. I turned away, without waiting for a response, without giving him another second of control. And I walked back to the front table, back to the people who were now looking at me differently, back to the life I was beginning to reclaim. As I sat down, the chairman leaned in slightly. Everything all right, he asked? I met his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I answered honestly. Yes, I said, and I meant it, because no matter what came next, I had already taken the first step, and there was no going back. I didn't look at Richard again for the rest of the evening, not because I was afraid of what he'd see, but because I already knew. He was watching me, measuring every move, trying to figure out when I had stopped being predictable, when I had stopped being his, and more importantly, when I had started becoming someone else. Evelyn, the chairman said, pulling me back into the conversation. We'd like to formally invite you to join the advisory board. There it was, not just recognition, authority, a seat at the table that actually mattered. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. Not overwhelming, grounding. I'd be honored, I said. And I meant it, because this wasn't given to me. I had stepped into it, earned it, reclaimed it. A woman beside me smiled warmly. We could use someone like you, she said. Someone who isn't afraid to challenge things. I let out a small breath. If you'd met me a year ago, I said quietly, you wouldn't have said that. She tilted her head. People change, she said. Yes, they do, but sometimes they don't change. They just finally stop hiding. The gala continued around us. Laughter, music, conversations that used to feel distant now felt close, real. And yet beneath it all, there was tension, because something had shifted tonight, and not everyone was comfortable with it. I excused myself briefly and stepped toward the balcony. I needed air, space, a moment to breathe without eyes on me. The night outside was cool, quiet compared to the noise inside. I rested my hands lightly on the railing, and for a second, I let myself feel everything. The adrenaline, the anger, the relief, the quiet growing sense of power. You always did prefer the quiet corners, always did prefer the quiet corners. His voice. Behind me. Of course. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't give him that. Instead, I kept my eyes on the city lights. I used to, I said. Footsteps approached Dee, stopped a few feet away. Tonight was his voice. Behind me. Of course. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't give him that. Instead, I kept my eyes on the city lights. I used to, I said. Footsteps approached, stopped a few feet away. Tonight was unexpected, Richard said. I almost laughed. Everything about tonight was unexpected for you, I replied. A pause. You've been hiding a lot from me, he said. I turned then, slowly, deliberately. And you haven't? I asked. That hit, because now we weren't dancing around it anymore. We were standing in it, directly, uncomfortably. His expression hardened slightly. That's not the same. Isn't it? It's not. I studied him for a moment. This man who had built his life on controlled perception and quiet manipulation. You had an affair, I said. Simple, clear, no emotion in my voice. That made it worse. It wasn't... Don't I cut in? He stopped. Because he heard something in my tone he hadn't heard before. Finality. I'm not interested in your version of the story, I said. Not tonight. Another silence. Wind brushing lightly between us. You're making this public, he said. No, I corrected. You did. I just stopped protecting you. That landed harder than anything else, because it was true. Every dinner, every event, every polite smile, I had been protecting him, his reputation, his image, at the cost of myself. And what now, he asked? There it was, the real question, not about the gala, not about the donation, about control, about what he was losing. I met his eyes. Now I said, I stopped pretending. His jaw tightened. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He exhaled slowly, frustration creeping in. You're angry. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. I was angry. Past tense. Important. I'm past that. He frowned, confused. Then what is this? I stepped a little closer. Not aggressive, just clear. This is clarity, I said. And I meant it, because anger clouds things. But clarity sharpens everything. I see you now, I continued. And more importantly, I see myself. That unsettled him more than any accusation could have, because this wasn't about punishment. It was about separation. Emotional, psychological, permanent. You're overreacting, he said, grasping for control again. I almost smiled. There it was. Dismissal. Minimization. The tools he always used. They always say that. I replied softly. Who people who are about to lose something they thought was guaranteed? That one hit deep. I saw it. In the way his shoulders stiffened. In the way his eyes flickered. He wasn't used to this version of me, and he didn't know how to handle it. You're my wife, he said firmly. I held his gaze. Yes, I said, legally. The word hung between us, cold, precise, not emotional, just factual. And suddenly, that word didn't carry the same weight it used to, because it wasn't a bond anymore. It was a technicality. You don't just walk away from a marriage like this, he continued. I tilted my head slightly. Like what? He hesitated, because he didn't have a real answer. A successful marriage, a respected partnership, a carefully constructed illusion. Exactly. You're going to regret this, he said finally. Maybe, maybe not. But one thing was certain. I would regret staying far more. I regret a lot of things, I said, but finding my voice won't be one of them. Another silence, longer this time. He studied me, trying to find the version of me he used to know, the one who would soften, back down, apologize. But she wasn't there anymore, and for the first time, he realized that. You've changed, he said quietly. I nodded. No, I corrected. I've revealed. That was the truth. I didn't become someone new. I just stopped hiding who I already was. And that made all the difference. I stepped back, creating space again, the same way I had inside, because distance matters. It defines boundaries. And I was finally learning how to set them. I'm going back inside, I said. He didn't stop me. He didn't argue, because for once, he didn't have the upper hand. As I walked past him, I felt it. Not victory, not yet. Something quieter, stronger. Freedom. Not complete, but real and growing. I returned to the gala, to the table, to the conversations that now felt like mine. And as I sat down again, I realized something important. Tonight wasn't the climax. It was the beginning, because Richard still thought this was about the gala, about the donation, about embarrassment. He didn't understand yet. This was about everything, and I had only just started. The next morning felt quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort you. The kind that makes you aware something has shifted permanently. I woke up before Richard. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that I didn't wait for him anymore. I didn't check if he was awake. I didn't wonder what mood he'd be in. I didn't plan my morning around him. I just got up. That alone felt strange, liberating, and terrifying. I stood in the kitchen pouring my coffee when I heard footsteps behind me. Evelyn. His voice. Careful, measured, different. I didn't turn immediately. Good morning, I said, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause. Then he stepped closer. We need to talk. Of course we did, but not on his terms. Not anymore. I have a meeting this morning, I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. His frustration flickered. This is more important. I finally turned. More important than what I asked. He hesitated, because he didn't have an answer that didn't reveal too much. Then whatever you think you're doing, he said instead. There it was again. Dismissal. I set my cup down slowly. I'm living my life, I said. That's not what it looks like. I raised an eyebrow slightly. And what does it look like? It looks like you're trying to make a statement. I almost smiled. Maybe I am. That threw him off, because I didn't deny it, didn't soften it, didn't apologize. You embarrassed me last night, he said. There it was. Not regret, not guilt, embarrassment. I nodded slowly. I imagine you felt that way. His eyes narrowed. That's all you have to say. What would you like me to say? I asked calmly. That I'm sorry for existing independently of you. Silence, sharp, cutting, because now the truth was out in the open, and it wasn't pretty. You're twisting this, he said. No, I replied. I'm clarifying it. Another pause, longer this time. Then he tried a different approach. Softer, more controlled. We've built a life together, Evelyn, he said. You don't just throw that away. I looked at him carefully. We built something, I said, but we didn't build it equally. That hit, because it was undeniable. I've supported you for decades, I continued, quietly, consistently, without recognition. That's not fair, he said quickly. It's accurate. He exhaled, frustrated. You chose that. Did I, or was I conditioned into it? That question lingered. I adapted, I said. There's a difference. He didn't like that. I could see it, because it shifted responsibility. From me to him. And now, he asked, now you just changed the rules? I shook my head. No, I said. Now I stopped playing a game I never agreed to. That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't emotional. It was logical, and logic is harder to argue with. You're overthinking this, he said, trying again to minimize it. I let out a slow breath. No, I said. I spent years, not breath. No, I said. I spent years not thinking about it enough. That stopped him. Because that was the truth. For years, I had ignored things, dismissed feelings, silenced instincts, to keep the peace, to maintain the image, to protect something that thinking about it enough. That stopped him. Because that was the truth. For years, I had ignored things, dismissed feelings, silenced instincts, to keep the peace, to maintain the image, to protect something that wasn't protecting me. And Lila? I asked suddenly. His body stiffened. There it was again, that crack in his composure. What about her? He said carefully. I held his gaze. How long? Silence. Thick. Heavy. Evelyn. How long, I repeated, because this mattered, not for anger, for clarity. For a few months, he said finally. I nodded slowly, processing it, not reacting. That unsettled him more than anything. You're not going to say anything, he asked. I already did, I said, because I had. Last night, when I stopped pretending. That's it, he pressed. What else is there to say? I asked. You made your choices, and you're just done, he said. There was something in his voice now, not quite regret, not quite fear, but close. I thought about it, really thought about it, because this moment mattered. Yes, I said finally. One word, clear, final. And for the first time, he looked unsure, not angry, not defensive, uncertain. You don't mean that, he said quietly. I did, and he could feel it. That's the problem, I said softly. You always assumed I didn't. Another silence. Then he ran a hand through his hair, frustrated, trying to regain control. We can fix this, he said. Can we? Or do you just want things to go back to how they were? Fix what I asked. This, he said, gesturing between us. This isn't something you fix, I replied. It's something you face. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't, because this version of me didn't exist before. Or maybe she did, and I just never let her speak. I'm not walking away without trying, he said. I nodded. You're free to try, I said. But I'm no longer obligated to stay. That was the difference. Before, I would have felt responsible for his feelings, for his mistakes, for maintaining the relationship at all costs. Now I felt responsible for myself, only myself. And that changed everything. What about our life? He asked. Our home, our reputation. There it was again. Reputation. Always reputation. I stepped closer. Just enough. Our life was built on silence, I said. Our home was built on imbalance, and our reputation was built on illusion. Each word landed heavier than the last, and I'm done carrying that, I finished. He didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing to argue with. Not really. Finally, he spoke. You're serious? I nodded. I am. Another pause. Then he asked the question I think he had been avoiding all along. What happens now? I took a breath. And for the first time, I read without hesitation. I moved forward. Then he asked the question I think he had been avoiding all along. What happens now? I took a breath. And for the first time, I answered without hesitation. I move forward, I said, without you. The words hung in the air, heavy, permanent, real. And in that moment, everything changed. Not because I said it, but because I meant it. I didn't leave the house that morning in anger. I left with purpose. That was the difference. For years, every major decision I made had been reactive. A response to Richard, a response to expectations, a response to fear. But this was mine. I drove downtown with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The city looked the same. Traffic, people rushing, coffee shops filled with quiet conversations. But I felt different inside it. Like I finally belonged in my own life, not orbiting someone else's. My phone buzzed as I pulled into the parking garage. A message from an unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Evelyn, we need to talk. Please. Lila. Of course. It was only a matter of time. I didn't respond. Not yet. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I didn't feel rushed anymore. That alone was new. I stepped into the elevator, watching my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked composed, not broken, not shaken. And for the first time in a long time, not invisible. When the doors opened, I walked straight into the foundation office. Heads turned. Not dramatically, but enough, because word had spread. It always does, especially after a night like that. Evelyn Karen, the director, said warmly. Good morning. Good morning, I replied. There was something different in the way she looked at me. Not just polite respect. Recognition. You made quite an impression last night, she added with a small smile. I didn't plan to, I said honestly. Sometimes those are the moments that matter most. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I had planned it more than I realized. Not the event itself, but the shift, the decision, the refusal to stay silent. I'd like to go over some ideas, I said, placing my bag down. If we're serious about expanding outreach, we need to rethink how we approach funding. Her eyes lit up. Let's talk. And just like that, I stepped into something new. Not as someone's wife, not as a background supporter, but as a voice, a decision maker, a presence. We spent the next 2 hours in a focused conversation. Real work, real impact. Not small talk, not polite nods. Strategy, vision, execution. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized something that hit deeper than anything else. I was good at this, not just capable. Good, sharp, instinctive, confident. All the things I had been told subtly and repeatedly that I wasn't, or didn't need to be. Have you ever considered taking on a larger role? Karen asked at one point. I paused. A year ago, I would have hesitated, doubted myself, deflected. Now, yes, I said simply. Her smile widened. Good. That word stayed with me. Good. Not surprising, not unexpected, just right. By the time I left the office, the sun was higher, brighter, and my phone had 3 missed calls, all from the same number. Lila. I sat in my car for a moment staring at the screen. Then finally, I called her back. She picked up on the second ring. Evelyn. Her voice was softer than I expected. Careful, almost nervous. Yes. A pause. I didn't think you'd call back. I said we'd talk. I replied, not warm, not cold, just neutral. I'm sorry, she said quickly. There it was, the apology. I waited, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted to hear what came after it. For everything, she continued. I didn't know. I didn't understand the full situation. I let that sit for a second. You knew he was married, I said. Yes, she admitted. So, what part didn't you understand? Silence. Then a quiet exhale. I didn't realize how much he was controlling the narrative, she said. Interesting. That word, narrative. What did he tell you, I asked. That you were distant, she said. That your marriage was basically over. That you stayed together for appearances. Of course, that sounded exactly like him, a version of the truth. Edited, reframed, convenient. And you believed that I asked. I wanted to, she said quietly. Honest. At least she was honest. I'm not calling to fight with you, she added. I needed you to hear it from me. I leaned back slightly in my seat, processing. I appreciate that, I said. And I did, because most people wouldn't have called, wouldn't have taken responsibility. But it doesn't change anything, I continued. I know. Another pause. I've ended things with him, she said. That surprised me. Not because I cared about their relationship, but because of the timing. Why I asked. Because last night she hesitated, then continued. I saw something I hadn't seen before. And what was that? You? I frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means you weren't what he described, she said. You weren't cold, or distant, or small. Small. That word hit differently, because that's exactly how I had been made to feel. And once I realized that she continued, I started questioning everything else. Smart. Painful. But smart. And I prompted, and I realized I didn't want to be part of that, she said. Another silence. Not awkward, just complete. I'm sorry, Evelyn, she said again. This time it felt different. Not rushed, not defensive, real. I hear you, I said, and that was enough. Because forgiveness wasn't something I needed to give right now. What I needed was peace, and surprisingly, I felt it. I wish you well, I added. Simple, final. You too, she said softly. Then the line went quiet. I sat there for a moment after the call ended, not shaken, not emotional, just steady, because something had shifted again. Not in Richard, not in Lila, in me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. And that changed everything. The house felt different when I got back that evening. Not empty, just unfamiliar. Like I was seeing it clearly for the first time. Every room carried a memory. Dinner parties where I smiled while Richard spoke over me. Quiet mornings where I moved around him like I was trying not to disturb something fragile. Conversations I avoided, truths I buried. I stood in the living room letting it all settle. Then I heard his voice. You're back. I turned. Richard was standing near the staircase, tie loosened, sleeves rolled. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like the weight of something had finally caught up to him. Yes, I said simply. There was a pause. He studied me, not with anger this time, not with control, but with something else. Uncertainty. We should talk, he said again. This time I didn't resist. Okay, I replied, because I was ready. Not to argue, not to defend, to finish it. We sat across from each other. Same living room, same furniture, but everything felt different. Because I was different. I spoke to Lila, he said. Of course he did. And, I asked. She ended things, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. That surprised him. You talked to her? Yes. Another pause. And you're okay with that? He asked. Why wouldn't I be? I replied. He looked confused, because he was expecting anger, or jealousy, or something that made sense in the old version of me. But there was none. I thought you'd be upset, he admitted. I was, I said, at first. That was the truth. I'm not anymore. That part he didn't understand. How, he asked. How do you just move past it? I leaned back slightly. I didn't move past it, I said. I moved through it. He frowned. I saw it for what it was. I continued. A symptom, not the cause. That landed, because it shifted the focus from the affair to the foundation beneath it. And what's the cause? He asked. I held his gaze. You. No hesitation, no softness, just truth. His jaw tightened. That's convenient, he said. It's accurate, I replied calmly. Silence. Then he exhaled. Frustration creeping back in. You're blaming everything on me now? No, I said. I'm acknowledging your role in it. And yours, he challenged. Fair question. And I didn't avoid it. I stayed, I said. I ignored things. I minimized what I felt. He nodded slightly like he'd caught something. So you admit it? Yes, I said. That threw him off again, because I didn't argue, didn't deflect, didn't get defensive. I'm responsible for staying too long, I continued. You're responsible for what you did with that. That distinction was clear and undeniable. He leaned forward slightly. So what now? He asked. You just walk away from everything. I thought about it. Carefully. Not everything I said. What does that mean? It means I'm walking away from this version of us, I replied. He stared at me, trying to process it. You think there's another version? He asked. No, I said softly. That answer hit harder than anything else, because it closed the door, completely. We had our chance, I added. We just didn't use it. Another silence, longer this time. He looked around the room, like he was seeing it the same way I had earlier, through a different lens. This house, he said slowly. This life, we built it together. Did we? Or did we just exist in it together? It doesn't feel like mine, I said. That was the truth, and saying it out loud made it real. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying I'm leaving. There it was, clear, simple, final. His face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. You're serious? I am. When? He asked. Soon, I said. I've already started making arrangements. That surprised him, because I hadn't told him, because I didn't need to. You've been planning this? He asked. I've been preparing myself, I corrected. Another pause. And where will you go? He asked. I smiled faintly. For the first time, I don't need to explain that. That frustrated him, because control was slipping. What about finances? He pressed. We'll handle it properly, I said. Fairly, legally, practical, grounded, not emotional. That unsettled him more than anything, because he couldn't manipulate it. Evelyn, he said softer now. We can still fix this. I shook my head. No, I said gently. We can't. Why not? Because I don't want to. That was the truth, and it mattered, because for years, what I wanted had never been the priority. Now it was. That's it, he asked. That's it. He sat back, silent, processing, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance, not control, not certainty. Loss, real loss. Not of me, of what I represented, of the structure he had relied on, the stability, the predictability, the version of me that made his life easier. You've changed, he said quietly. I nodded. I've come back to myself. That was the difference. I hadn't become someone new. I had returned to someone I had abandoned. And there's nothing I can say, he asked. I thought about it. Honestly? No, I said. Because this wasn't about words anymore. It was about time, choices, patterns, things that couldn't be undone with a conversation. He nodded slowly, almost accepting it. I didn't think you'd ever leave, he admitted. I didn't either, I said. That was the truth. And maybe that was the biggest problem all along. He assumed I wouldn't, and I believed him, until I didn't. I'll give you space, he said finally. Thank you. We sat there for a moment longer. Two people, same room, different lives. Then I stood up and walked upstairs. Not to escape, but to begin, because leaving doesn't start when you walk out the door. It starts when you decide. You deserve to. The first night I slept alone didn't feel lonely. It felt quiet. Not the kind of silence that presses against your chest. The kind that lets you finally hear yourself think. I lay in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Same house, different space, and somehow a completely different life. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would. After everything, the betrayal, the confrontation, the decision to leave. But instead, I felt calm. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't pretending. The next morning, I woke up early. Not out of habit, out of intention. I made coffee, sat by the window. Watched the sunlight come in slowly, and I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not for Richard to wake up, not for a conversation, not for permission. Just living. My phone buzzed. A message from Karen, thinking about yesterday. Let's discuss that leadership role. Lunch. I smiled. Absolutely. I replied. That word used to scare me. Absolutely. Now it felt right. Decisive. Certain. I got dressed carefully. Not to impress anyone. Not to fit into a role. But because I wanted to. Because I liked how I looked. Because I was showing up for myself. When I walked downstairs, Richard was already in the kitchen. He glanced up. There was something quieter about him now. Less because I liked how I looked. Because I was showing up for myself. When I walked downstairs, Richard was already in the kitchen. He glanced up. There was something quieter about him now. Less certain. You're up early, he said. I have plans, I replied. What kind of plans? He asked. I paused. Not because I didn't want to answer, but because I was deciding how much to share. Work, I said simply. He nodded, like he was trying to understand this new version of me. Evelyn, he said after a moment about last night. I met his eyes. I meant what I said, I told him. I know, he replied. That was it. No argument, no push, just acceptance. And strangely, that made it easier. I picked up my bag. He'll be out for most of the day, I added. He nodded again. Okay, no questions, no control, just space. And I walked out the door without looking back. Lunch with Karen wasn't just a conversation. It was an opportunity. We sat at a small restaurant near the office. Quiet, warm, comfortable. It'll be direct, she said after we ordered. We want you to step into a senior leadership role. We sat at a small restaurant near the office. Quiet, warm, comfortable. I'll be direct, she said after we ordered. We want you to step into a senior leadership role. I didn't react immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the moment. I'm listening, I said. You have vision, she continued. You understand the mission, and more importantly, people listen to you. That last part stayed with me. People listen to you. For so long I had felt unheard. Now I was being recognized for having something worth hearing. It would be a big step, she added. More responsibility, more visibility. Visibility. That word would have terrified me before. Now it felt right. I want it, I said. No hesitation? Her smile said everything. Good, she replied, because we want you. And just like that, another piece of my life shifted, not because of Richard, not because of the past, because of me. When I got back to the house later that afternoon, it felt even less like home. Boxes were already stacked in the corner of the guest room. My things, organized, intentional. I had started packing without even realizing how quickly I'd move. Richard stood in the doorway, watching. "You're really doing this," he said. "I am." He stepped inside slowly. "I spoke to a lawyer," he said. I nodded. So did I. That surprised him again. Of course it did, because I was no longer reacting. I was moving ahead. "We can make this as smooth as possible," he offered. "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it, not out of kindness for him, but out of respect for myself. I didn't want chaos. I wanted closure. Clean, clear, final. He hesitated, then said something I didn't expect. "I didn't realize how much I relied on you." I looked at him, really looked, and for once, he seemed honest, not manipulative, not defensive, just aware. "That was part of the problem," I said gently. He nodded. "I see that now. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But it didn't change anything." "I hope you figure it out," I added. That was the closest thing to kindness I could offer, without losing myself. He gave a small, almost sad smile. "I hope you do too." I already had. That was the difference. That evening I sat alone again. But it didn't feel like loss. It felt like transition, like standing at the edge of something new, not knowing exactly what it would look like, but knowing it would be mine. I thought about the gala. That moment, sitting alone, invisible, ignored, and then standing up, choosing myself. That was the turning point, not the donation, not the spotlight, the decision, the refusal to stay small. And now, everything else was catching up to that moment. My phone buzzed again. A notification. The foundation had posted a recap from the gala. There was a photo of me on stage, speaking, confident, present, visible. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I was proud of the image, but because I recognized the woman in it. Finally. For years, I had been living a life that looked complete from the outside, but felt empty inside. Now it was the opposite. Uncertain on the outside, but full inside. And that mattered more. I turned off the light, lay back on the bed, and let myself feel it fully. Not fear, not regret. Freedom. The day I moved out, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a decision, fully realized. I woke up early again. Not out of habit anymore, out of purpose. The movers were scheduled for 9. I had already packed most of my things. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes, books, a few photographs. The rest I left behind without hesitation. Because I understood something now. A house is not a life. And I wasn't taking fragments of a life that no longer belonged to me. I stood in the doorway of the guest room looking at the boxes. Everything labeled, everything clear, everything mine. There was a knock. "Richard." "Ready?" he asked. I turned to him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anything heavy. No anger, no sadness, just distance. "Yes," I said. He nodded, like he didn't know what else to say. We walked downstairs together, slow, quiet. The movers arrived shortly after. Efficient, professional. They didn't know the story behind the boxes they were carrying, and that was fine. This wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about transition. Richard stood near the kitchen while they worked, watching, silent. I could feel his eyes on me, not controlling, not judging, just observing, like he was trying to understand what he had lost. Or maybe what he had never truly valued. "You don't have to stay," I told him gently. He shook his head. "I want to." I didn't argue. If this was his way of processing, that was his journey, not mine. The last box was carried out. The space felt empty, echoing, different. I picked up my bag, the final piece, and turned toward the door. "Evelyn," he said. I paused, not out of obligation, out of closure. "Yes." He hesitated, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I'm sorry." There it was, the apology, late, but real. I studied his face, looking for something. Excuse, manipulation, but I didn't see it. Just regret. "I know," I said, and I meant it. Not because he had proven it, but because I no longer needed him to. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he added. I almost smiled. I already have. That was the truth, and it changed everything. He nodded, like he understood, or maybe like he was finally starting to. I stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter, not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. I got into my car, sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing, letting it settle. This was it. No more hesitation, no more second guessing, just forward. My new apartment wasn't large, it wasn't grand, but it was mine, every inch of it. When I walked in, the sunlight hit the windows just right. Warm, inviting, alive. The movers brought everything in, set the boxes down, and left. And suddenly, it was quiet again, but not empty, full of possibility. I walked slowly through the space, touching the walls, looking at the windows, imagining where things would go, how it would feel. And for the first time in years, I wasn't designing a life around someone else. I was creating one for myself. My phone rang. Karen. "How's the move?" she asked. "Done," I said. "How do you feel?" I paused. Let the question land. "Free." She laughed softly. "That's a good place to start." "It is," I agreed. "We'll celebrate soon." She added, "I'd like that." We hung up, and I stood there for a moment longer, letting everything settle. The past, the pain, the decisions, all of it, not erased, but transformed. I walked over to the window, looked out at the street below. People moving, living, continuing, and I realized something simple. Life doesn't wait. It moves, with or without you. And for a long time, I had been standing still. Now I wasn't. I picked up one of the boxes, opened it. Inside was the dress I wore to the gala. Carefully folded, still elegant, still powerful. I ran my fingers over the fabric and smiled. Not because of how it looked, but because of what it represented. That night, I stopped waiting to be seen. I chose to be visible. I chose myself. And that choice changed everything. I placed the dress gently into the closet, not as a reminder of the past, but as a symbol of the moment I took my life back. The sun began to set, casting golden light across the room, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. And that was enough. After everything I went through, I realized something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. We don't lose ourselves all at once. It happens slowly, in small compromises, in quiet silences, in moments where we choose comfort over truth. And before we know it, we're living a life that looks right from the outside, but feels wrong on the inside. For years, I thought love meant endurance, staying, fixing, understanding. But real love starts with yourself. It starts the moment you decide that your voice matters, that your presence matters, that you deserve to be seen, heard, and respected, not just tolerated. Leaving wasn't the hardest part. Choosing to stop betraying myself was. And once I made that choice, everything else followed. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. They didn't disappear. But they no longer didn't disappear. But they no longer controlled me. Because I finally understood that peace isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you claim. So if you're watching this and you feel stuck, invisible, trolled me. Because I finally understood that peace isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you claim. So if you're watching this and you feel stuck, invisible, or unheard, I want you to ask yourself one question. What am I accepting that I know I shouldn't be? That question changed my life. And maybe it can change yours too. If my story resonated with you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment where you chose yourself even when it was difficult? Or maybe you're still in that place trying to find the strength to do it. Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories that remind us we're not alone, and that it's never too late to start over. Wherever you are, and whatever time you are watching this, I am truly glad you are here.